What if one quiet act of kindness, something so simple, so unnoticed, held the power to change not just a moment, but a life? Tonight's story begins in the clatter of a busy kitchen where a single dad was just trying to make it through the day. But what happened next reminded us all sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones holding the greatest light. If stories of compassion, unexpected connections, and hope speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe. We tell stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Now, let's begin. Single dad was cleaning cups, then greeted the guests in 6 languages. The CEO didn't blink at first. The dishwasher whirred in the background, its hum nearly lost beneath the clang of silverware, the low chatter of servers, and the ambient jazz echoing through Midtown's high-end bistro cadenza. It was just past 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, quiet by the restaurant's standards, but Daniel Reynolds didn't notice the hour or the calm. His eyes were on the sink where a stack of wine glasses waited their turn to gleam. Daniel moved with quiet precision like someone who'd done this for years, though he hadn't. 2 years ago, he had stood in front of classrooms teaching Spanish and French, reciting Rilke in German to eager teenagers. Now he scrubbed remnants of duck confit and béarnaise sauce from white porcelain plates with hands that once held chalk and lesson plans. He didn't complain. He couldn't afford to. Just across the stainless steel counter, perched atop an overturned milk crate, sat Elena, his 6-year-old daughter knees tucked beneath her coat, a workbook balanced on her lap. Her honey-brown curls drooped as she tried to stay awake, pencil scratching softly in the quiet lulls between the clamor. Every few minutes Daniel would glance up, not to rush her, not to scold, but just to check. She'd insisted on coming with him tonight. The babysitter had fallen through. Again. He'd packed her dinner, her homework, her bedtime story in his jacket pocket, and a blanket that now covered her legs. Elena never once complained. Outside the kitchen, laughter erupted from the main dining hall. Daniel stiffened slightly. He recognized that tone: corporate diners, expensive suits, martinis swirling in manicured hands. Big tippers if you did things right. Brutal if you didn't. Dish boy. A server barked from the service window. More dessert plates now. Daniel moved quickly, not out of fear but habit. He knew his place. He loaded the plates, wiped the rim of each one with the practiced hands of someone who respected details. It was his classroom now, quieter, colder, but still full of things that needed care. As he returned to the sink, he overheard 2 line cooks whispering, "That guy's got the saddest eyes I've ever seen. Who brings a kid to work like this? Man's one step from living on the street." Daniel didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. He wasn't ashamed. He had Elena, and that was more than enough. But behind him, Elena's pencil had stopped moving. He turned and found her watching him, eyes wide. She'd heard too. "Hey," he said, gently kneeling beside her. "You okay?" She gave a small nod. "They don't know you, Daddy." Daniel smiled, and it hurt a little how proud she was of him. "No, they don't," he said. "But we do. That's what matters." She leaned forward, whispering, "I finished all the spelling words?" "Yeah, let's see." He picked up her workbook, flipping through pages marked with her careful print. "Flawless. You're making me look bad." She giggled, then yawned. "Okay, sweetheart. Time to rest. 10 more glasses and we go home." Daniel tucked her coat tighter around her and returned to the sink. He had scrubbed maybe 5 glasses when a crash echoed from the hallway. A server sprinted in, flustered. "We've got a problem. Some international guests just walked in, VIPs apparently. No one speaks their language. The host is panicking. We think one of them's trying to order something off menu in Arabic French. No clue." Daniel kept scrubbing. "Can you—" The server hesitated. "Didn't you used to teach or something? Can you talk to them?" Daniel looked up. It had been years. His tongue wasn't rusty, but his confidence was. Still, he dried his hands. "Where are they sitting?" He stepped into the dining room and immediately felt the heat of a dozen eyes. The air buzzed with tension. A man in a dark suit stood at the center of it, gesturing toward a bottle of wine and speaking sharply in French. A woman near him was trying to calm another guest, an older woman who looked close to tears. Daniel approached slowly. "Pardon, monsieur. Puis-je vous aider avec le menu?" The Frenchman blinked. "Vous parlez français?" Daniel nodded and smiled. "Bien sûr. Et l'anglais, l'espagnol, l'arabe? Selon ce que vous avez besoin." The woman at the table gasped softly. "You speak Arabic?" "Ajal, بالطبع." "Yes, of course." Daniel turned to her with a respectful nod. "هل تحتاجين إلى أي مساعدة? Do you need any assistance?" She covered her mouth, eyes shining. The room fell silent. He moved with ease from one table to another, answering questions, recommending dishes, soothing tensions with a few well-placed words and a warm, grounded tone. It wasn't just language, it was presence. He didn't try to impress, he simply saw people. And for a moment they saw him too. In the far back, near the dim-lit corner of the room, a woman sat alone with a glass of red wine. No one had paid attention to her when she entered. She hadn't needed anyone to. Dressed in a clean-cut navy suit, eyes unreadable behind steel-rimmed glasses, she watched the entire scene unfold. Isabel Raines, CEO of the Cadenza Hospitality Group, hadn't come to be entertained. She came to observe. She'd received complaints about this location, cold service, robotic staff, high turnover. But in this quiet man cleaning glasses with calloused hands and speaking 6 languages like second nature, she saw something no training manual could replicate. He didn't know she was watching, and he didn't need her to. Not yet. The rain fell in steady sheets, tapping against the windshield in a rhythm that echoed the tension in Daniel's chest. He sat still in the driver's seat of his aging Honda Civic engine, off hands clenched around a thin envelope. Beside him in the passenger seat, Elena swung her feet, gently humming softly to herself and tracing shapes in the fogged window. The letter had arrived that morning, folded crisply inside a government-issued envelope, plain and merciless. The Department of Social Services seal stamped on the front already told him what he feared. He opened it anyway. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, we regret to inform you that your current child support subsidy will be discontinued effective next month due to exceeding asset reevaluation thresholds." He hadn't exceeded anything. He hadn't changed jobs, received raises, or won the lottery. The only thing that had changed was someone else's paperwork. Another form misfiled, another algorithm unchecked. He read it twice, then once more. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel resilient. He felt tired. Now, with Elena sitting next to him in her oversized yellow raincoat and the last 2 granola bars between them, he debated how to explain what this letter meant. "Elena," he said gently. "Yeah," she chirped, still looking out the window at the blurred neon lights of the mini-mart across the street. He tried to find the words. She was only 6. She didn't need to worry about the cost of rent or utilities or what it meant to buy oatmeal instead of eggs, because oatmeal stretched further. She didn't need to know that her daddy was dangerously close to losing the fragile balance he'd fought so hard to keep since her mother died. So instead, he smiled and said, "We're going to be a little tighter on snacks this month." Elena turned, studying him like she always did, thoughtful beyond her years. "Okay, but we'll still have oatmeal, always." She nodded, satisfied. "Then we're fine." God? How did she make it sound so easy? They drove in silence the rest of the way to the apartment, a studio that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. Daniel didn't complain. It was clean, safe, and it was theirs. He tucked Elena into the pull-out couch with her favorite book and kissed her forehead. "Want me to read tonight, no daddy?" "You look tired. I can read to myself." Her kindness made his throat tighten. As she read softly under the covers, Daniel pulled the letter from his coat pocket again and laid it on the counter. His budget was already razor-thin. With the subsidy gone, something had to give. And the only thing left to give was time, which meant more shifts, later hours, More moments missed. He stood at the small kitchen sink staring at the water as it swirled down the drain and felt something slip in his chest like a wire pulled too taut finally giving. But even then he didn't allow the tears to fall, because Elena was watching. The next morning, Daniel walked Elena to school through the misty cold, holding her hand tightly in his. She skipped in her rain boots, splashing at puddles, her laughter a small kind of miracle. When they reached the school gate, she paused, suddenly serious. "Daddy," she said, "if we don't have money for field trip day, it's okay. I'll just draw pictures about it instead." He crouched to her level, heart stinging. "You're not supposed to worry about things like that, sweet pea." "I know. But sometimes I do, anyway." He kissed her cheek and pulled her into his arms. "I'll take care of it. That's my job. Remember." She nodded solemnly, then broke into a smile. "Okay. Bye." And just like that, she disappeared into the crowd of backpacks and bouncing braids. Daniel stood there a moment longer than he should have, hands shoved in his coat pockets, before turning back toward the train station. He had 3 hours before his shift. Just enough time to drop by the social services office and beg someone to help. It was already crowded when he arrived, mothers with strollers, elderly veterans, teenagers slouched in hoodies, all clutching papers that decided their tomorrows. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as numbers blinked on the wall. Daniel waited nearly 40 minutes before being called. He stepped up to the glass window and tried to keep his voice even as he explained the mistake. The woman behind the counter listened, typing without expression. "I understand," she said finally. "But once the reevaluation posts, there's very little we can do without an official appeal. That process takes 60 to 90 days. Daniel clenched his jaw. "I can't wait 3 months. "I'm sorry," she said, and Daniel didn't doubt that she meant it, but policy always had more power than empathy. He stepped outside into the rain, the same envelope now damp in his hand, and leaned against the brick wall, closing his eyes. Was it always going to be like this? Was he always going to be one accident, one letter, one missed shift away from everything falling apart? Then he remembered Elena's words the night before as she'd wrapped herself up on the milk crate. "They don't know you, Daddy." Maybe not, but someone had seen something. That thought surprised him. The woman at the restaurant. She'd been sitting in the back alone, watching. He hadn't seen her react. Not a smile, not a nod, but she had watched, closely. And in a world where he'd long since grown used to being invisible, maybe that alone was enough to hold on to, at least for now. That night, as he clocked in and tied his apron, Daniel found something unexpected. Tucked under the register, a folded sheet of paper, unmarked. Curious, he opened it. Inside, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, "Come to the 5th floor conference room tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'd like a word." He stared at it for a long moment, heartbeat steady but unsure. He didn't know who I was, but he had a feeling that maybe someone had noticed. The next morning began in silence. Daniel stood at the cracked bathroom mirror, adjusting his collar with hands that shook just enough to betray the calm he was trying to project. Elena was still asleep on the pull-out couch, wrapped in her patchwork quilt, one hand curled beneath her chin. He didn't wake her. He just watched her for a moment, letting the stillness steady him. He tucked the mysterious note into his coat pocket, the handwriting still crisp in his mind. "Come to the 5th floor conference room." Whoever I was, they hadn't signed it with a title. No hint of threat, no accusation, just a request. But in Daniel's world, requests from above often came with consequences. He left, early, arriving at Bistro Cadenza a full hour before his shift. The restaurant was still shuttered, the front dining room dim tables waiting to be reset. No servers yet, no chefs. Just the echo of his shoes on the polished tile as he walked to the back hallway and approached the stairwell. The 5th floor conference room wasn't part of his world. That was management territory, suits, meetings, catered lunches with clients, and laminated goals on easel boards. Still, he climbed. When he reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Inside sat Isabel Raines. She didn't look like a woman who waited often. Her posture was precise, hands folded, no phone in sight. She didn't rise when he entered, just looked up and studied him as if she already knew how the conversation would go. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice even. "Thank you for coming." He blinked. "You know my name." "I make it a point to know who works in my restaurants," she said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please." Daniel sat carefully, like he might somehow leave a stain just by existing. Isabel didn't waste time. "I saw what happened 2 nights ago. With the international guests." He nodded, unsure of what to say. "You spoke, what, 5 languages, 6, he said quietly. "If you count my rusty Portuguese." "Let's count it," she said, almost smiling. "You handled a situation my staff couldn't solve with calm precision and respect. And you did it while on dish duty." "I wasn't trying to stand out," Daniel said quickly. "I just didn't want things to escalate." Isabel tilted her head. "That's not what impressed me most. It wasn't the number of languages. It was the way you spoke to them, like they mattered. You looked them in the eye. You didn't perform." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I used to teach. Before life changed. Why aren't you teaching now?" He hesitated, the words slow and careful. "There was an incident. A student I advocated for, she was undocumented. The school board didn't like the attention. They said I overstepped. I was asked to resign. After that, no one would hire me. I took what I could." Isabel was quiet for a long beat. "That must have been difficult," she said finally. "It was hardest on my daughter. She doesn't understand why I don't go to work in a tie anymore. She just knows I tuck her in at night smelling like bleach and dish soap." The silence stretched. Then Isabel leaned forward, her voice softer. "I wasn't born with a silver spoon, Mr. Reynolds. My father came to this country with 2 shirts and a welding license. We ate rice and lentils for 3 years straight. He taught me that language is a bridge not just to communicate but to connect. What I saw in you reminded me of him." Daniel blinked. Something about her tone shifted, no longer CEO to employee. Something quieter, more human. "Why did you ask me here?" he asked finally. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I'm building a new training program for our front-of-house staff, a cultural and language integration initiative across our regional branches. We failed to connect with our growing international clientele, and I believe that's costing us not just money, but reputation. I want to pilot this program here, and I want you to lead it." Daniel stared at her. "You want me to teach again?" "I want you to do what you clearly do best," Isabel said. "Connect, communicate, inspire." He didn't speak right away. A dozen conflicting emotions rose in him. Disbelief, hesitation, hope so fragile it made his ribs ache. "I'm not a polished speaker," he said. "I don't have credentials anymore. I'm just the guy who cleans cups." "No," she said firmly. "You're the man no one noticed, but you're also the man who sees everyone else. That's a rare gift, and I'd be a fool not to use it." Daniel exhaled slowly. "I'll need time and flexibility. I can't work full-time. My daughter." "Bring her," Isabel interrupted. "There's a quiet room next to the training space. We'll make it work." His chest tightened. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said. Then added more gently, "Let me be clear, I'm not offering charity. I'm offering opportunity. Because you earned it, without asking for anything." The room was still. Daniel nodded barely. "All right," he said. "Let's see what happens." That night after his shift, Elena bounced along the sidewalk beside him, holding his hand, her backpack thumping against her back. "Did anything interesting happen today?" she asked. He smiled. "Maybe. Someone at work wants me to help teach people again." Her eyes lit up, like a teacher, sort of. She grinned. "You're really good at teaching." He looked at her, her face bright in the glow of the streetlights, and realized something simple and profound. He hadn't just been given a second chance. He'd been seen. And somehow that made all the difference. Rain blurred the windows of Bistro Cadenza as dusk settled across Midtown. Inside the dining room flickered with warm golds and shadows, clinking glasses, and quiet conversation filling the space. Daniel, dressed in a black button-down shirt that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, stood at the edge of the newly renovated training room, watching a group of nervous employees gather their notepads and badges. It was his first day leading the cultural immersion orientation, and he felt like an imposter. The room was small, just 6 people, 2 servers, a hostess, 1 junior manager, and 2 recent hires with limited English. Daniel had spent all night preparing conversation modules, pronunciation games, and real-life role-play scenarios in French, Spanish, and Arabic. But still a whisper of doubt circled his mind like a cold wind through a cracked window. Would they take him seriously? Would they see past the apron? Just before he stepped up to start, he caught a glimpse through the door's glass panel. Isabel. She wasn't in her office. She wasn't behind the scenes. She was sitting in the back row. Again. Dressed sharply as always, hair pulled back into a precise twist, hands resting quietly in her lap. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were focused entirely on him. Daniel's breath caught for a beat before he turned back to the room. "All right," he said, his voice calm despite the storm beneath his ribs. "Let's begin by telling me how you say hello in your home language." A soft murmur of greetings echoed through the room. "Hola, bonjour, assalamu alaikum," and a few awkward waves. Smiles slowly followed. He nodded. Perfect. That's the first lesson. No matter where someone's from, they want to feel at home. Language is more than words. It's belonging. As the session flowed, so did Daniel. He showed them how to greet with cultural nuance, how to understand body language, how to listen with more than their ears. The room gradually leaned in, laughed, asked questions, practiced accents, mispronounced with joy. Even the shyest server tried out her broken French, and Daniel gave her a look of such warmth that she grinned with pride. And all the while, Isabel watched. Later, after the last trainee left and the chairs were half stacked, Daniel lingered organizing flashcards. Isabel stood slowly and approached. "You have a gift," she said, no preamble. "I have years of practice," he replied modestly. She studied him as if weighing how much truth that humility held. "You remind me of my father," she said after a pause. He was a welder. Rough hands, quiet voice. But he never met a person he didn't try to speak to. Didn't matter if they were the mayor or the mailman. He'd ask questions. Listen. Learn how to say thank you in their language by the next week. He believed if you spoke someone's language even badly, they'd forgive everything else. Daniel's posture softened. "Sounds like a good man." "He was," she said. "He died when I was 21. Lung complications. Too many years without safety gear, too much pride to complain." Daniel could hear something fragile in her voice, something she hadn't meant to share or hadn't shared in a long time. He didn't interrupt. "I built everything in his name," she continued. "The company, the mission, the multilingual hospitality concept. But somewhere along the line, it got diluted. Efficiency replaced empathy. Numbers swallowed names. And you started watching from the corners," Daniel said gently. Isabel blinked. "What makes you say that?" "You don't sit in boardrooms, not at first. You sit in the corner booths. You watch before you speak. I recognized it because I do the same thing." That made her smile just slightly, but it lit her face in a quiet, rare way. "I suppose we both prefer shadows. I just never expected someone to be watching me from them." Her smile faded, but her eyes stayed soft. Most people only look up when there's something to gain. You looked up because someone needed to be seen. That's why I chose you. Daniel felt something shift inside him, some wall, some old doubt. It didn't crumble, not yet, but it cracked, enough for light to come through. They walked out together into the main restaurant. The dinner rush was winding down. Soft music played. A few remaining guests lingered over wine and desserts. Daniel moved to gather Elena from the back. She had spent the evening curled in a reading nook. Isabel had helped furnish a child-sized beanbag chair, a tiny lamp, and a stack of bilingual books that made Daniel want to weep when he first saw them. But when he reached the corner, Elena was already standing coat in hand. "Hi, Miss Isabel," she said brightly. "Hi there, Elena." Isabel replied with surprising warmth. "Did you finish your book? 3 of them. And I drew you something." She handed over a folded paper with careful coloring. It showed a stick-figure man with a tie, a little girl in a yellow dress, and speech bubbles in 3 languages floating between them. "That's me and Daddy," Elena explained. "We're teaching people how to be kind with words." Isabel stared at the picture, the corner of her mouth twitching. "I think this is going on my office wall." As they stepped out into the night, Isabel turned to Daniel once more. "Tomorrow," she said, "I want to introduce you to someone from the corporate office. They need to see what I saw, what everyone will see soon." Daniel nodded, feeling something steady build in his chest. Not pride, not yet, but a kind of peace, a kind of knowing. For years he had watched the world from the margins, from behind dish pits and job rejections, grief and whispered judgments. Now someone had sat in the corner for him, and she hadn't looked away. The snow came early that year. By the time Daniel stepped off the subway platform and onto the glistening sidewalk near the restaurant, delicate flurries had begun to fall light. Hesitant like the season itself, wasn't sure it was welcome. He adjusted the collar of his jacket. Elena's mittened hand wrapped snugly in his, her breath visible in soft clouds. It had been 2 weeks since he'd started the language training pilot. 2 weeks of standing in front of strangers sharing not just skills but stories. 2 weeks of wondering, is this real? 2 weeks of watching his daughter read peacefully in the little corner made just for her while he taught about verbs, vowels, and respect. Something inside him had started to thaw. But tonight was different. He felt it the moment he walked through the service entrance. The building was quiet, too quiet. The kitchen staff had already left the lights dimmed in the training room. The dining area echoed with the soft clinking of glassware being reset for tomorrow's brunch. And near the host stand stood Isabel, her coat draped over her arm, talking to a man Daniel didn't recognize. The man was in his 50s, square-shouldered with silver hair and a polished demeanor that broadcast corporate authority without him needing to say a word. His name tag, subtle but unmistakable, read, Andrew Vaughn, VP Regional Operations. Isabel spotted Daniel instantly and nodded. "You're right on time." Andrew turned, extended his hand. "You must be Daniel Reynolds." Daniel shook it, carefully firm but humble. "I've heard quite a bit about you," Andrew continued. "Multilingual former educator, raised your daughter on your own while working night shifts, impressive resume, especially for someone who wasn't looking to be noticed." Daniel offered a polite smile. Sometimes the resume's in the living, not the ink. That made Andrew chuckle. "Fair enough." Isabel motioned toward the back. "Let's talk in the training room." Elena, sensing the tone of the evening, gave her dad's hand a squeeze. "I'll read okay." He knelt. "You sure I'll be fine?" "I've got the blue flashlight," she whispered as if that sealed the deal. Daniel kissed her cheek, then followed Isabel and Andrew to the room that just weeks ago he'd only seen as a hallway he wasn't allowed to enter. The conversation was direct. Andrew asked about his teaching background, the immigration case that cost him his license, the languages he spoke, the content he developed for the pilot. Daniel answered each question with clarity, humility, and just enough vulnerability to remind them this wasn't a script, it was his life. "And why did you say yes to Isabel's offer?" Andrew asked finally. Daniel paused, then said, "Because my daughter deserves to see me doing what I love. And because the guests who walk through your doors speak more than English. They bring memories, fears, hopes. Sometimes all they want is to be understood, even for a moment. I can help your staff give them that." Andrew leaned back, fingers tapping the edge of the table. Isabel watched him silently, her expression unreadable. But Daniel noticed the way her fingers flexed slightly, like she was holding her breath beneath her calm surface. After a long moment, Andrew stood and extended his hand again. "I'll be honest, I didn't expect much when Isabel pitched this. But you're the real thing, Mr. Reynolds. Not a trainer, not a consultant, a bridge." Daniel blinked, taken aback. "Thank you. We'll review this pilot after the quarter. But if the results continue to trend the way they are, I'd like to propose a formal expansion and a permanent role for you to lead it." He turned to Isabel. "I'll get legal started on the paperwork. Nice work." When Andrew left, Isabel didn't speak right away. Then, quietly, she said, "He doesn't compliment anyone." Daniel exhaled slowly, the gravity of what had just happened beginning to settle. "Is this really happening?" She looked at him, eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. "You earned it. Every bit of it." He nodded, then gave a sheepish smile. "So, I guess I'm not just the guy who cleans cups anymore." Her expression didn't change, but her voice lowered almost so he had to lean in to hear it. "No, Daniel. You're the man who taught a room how to speak with dignity. The man who made corporate listen. And the man my staff now look to, not because they're told to, but because they trust you." His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't sure how to carry so many words of belief at once. As he opened the door to retrieve Elena, he found her already waiting with her coat, zipped cheeks, rosy eyes beaming. "Daddy," she whispered, bouncing slightly. That man looked important. "He is." "Did he like you?" Daniel smiled and lifted her into his arms. "He did." "I think," she grinned. "Told you, you're the best." As they stepped out into the light snow, Isabel followed them to the door. "Daniel," she called before he reached the sidewalk. He turned. She held out a small envelope. He opened it as the wind tugged at his coat. Inside was a handwritten note. "You once told me no one really saw you. Consider this my reply, I do." Isabel Daniel stared at the note for a long moment. Then he folded it gently like it was something fragile and rare, something not to be lost. For years, he had been invisible. Now, in one night with one note, he wasn't. The next morning, Daniel sat alone in the small cafe 2 blocks from Elena's school, staring into a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. The world outside was a soft blur of slush and overcast light. Around him, couples murmured over eggs and toast business people typed furiously, and baristas called names he didn't recognize. It was the first time in months he hadn't had to clock in early or rush across town to pick up an extra shift. And yet, he didn't quite know how to be still. Folded neatly in the pocket of his coat was Isabel's note from the night before. He'd read it 3 times before bed and once again this morning before dropping Elena off. "You once told me no one really saw you. Consider this my reply, I do." 7 words, simple, direct. But they echoed in him like church bells. For years, Daniel had lived in survival mode, head down, shoulders squared, moving through each day like a man crossing a tightrope. Now, someone had placed solid ground beneath his feet, and it left him oddly unsteady. He sipped his coffee and wondered if this was what hope felt like, unfamiliar, terrifying, beautiful. Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived at Bistro Cadenza for a staff-wide workshop Isabel had scheduled. The training room buzzed with anticipation. Servers, hosts, kitchen managers, even housekeeping staff were present. Some looked curious, others skeptical. Daniel stood at the front, not with a PowerPoint or a lecture, but with a whiteboard and a single sentence written in block letters. "Everyone speaks. Not everyone feels heard." He let the room sit in that silence for a beat too long. Then he said, "Raise your hand if you've ever spoken to someone in English who looked at you like you were broken." A few hands went up. "Raise your hand if you've ever tried to speak someone else's language." And they smiled even though you messed it up. Nearly every hand rose. Soft laughter followed. Daniel smiled gently. That's what this program is about. Not perfection. connection. He walked them through phrases in Mandarin, Arabic, Tagalog, Hindi, simple greetings, expressions of welcome. He asked them to pair up to say them aloud. At first, there was discomfort, laughter, missteps, but then confidence. By the end, the room was filled with overlapping voices from around the world, like music, like home. At the back, Isabel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. She didn't speak, but her eyes didn't leave him. After the session, as people dispersed, Isabel motioned for him to join her in her office upstairs. It was a modern space-glass walls, warm wood, sleek design, but lived in. On her shelves sat photos of her family, a small ceramic elephant, and now tucked beside a leather-bound planner, Elena's drawing from the other week. Daniel noticed it immediately. "I framed it," she said, following his gaze. "Couldn't just pin it like a memo." "She'll be thrilled," Daniel replied with a soft chuckle. "She's been asking if you hung it in your CEO tower." Isabel smiled, genuinely not the curated kind reserved for investors. "Tell her she has a permanent exhibit." They sat across from each other this time, not as boss and employee, but something in between, something gentler. Isabel studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You know," she began, voice softer than usual, "when I first saw you back in the dining room, I wasn't sure what I was looking at." Daniel arched an eyebrow. "A man with his hands in too many dishes." She shook her head. "No. I saw someone who did something rare. You didn't perform. You didn't try to be impressive. You just responded, with grace. You saw people. And that told me everything I needed to know." He sat back, absorbing her words. "I think," she added, quieter now, "I've spent most of my career being the one who anticipates, who calculates, who leads from control. But watching you, how you listen, how you allow silence to mean something, makes me think I've missed a lot." Daniel didn't speak right away. Then softly he said, "Silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's where people finally feel safe." She looked at him, really looked at him. No shield, no filter. "I was married once," she confessed, and he blinked, surprised. Briefly. "We were both building our empires, his out of tech, mine out of strategy. We spoke the same language but never truly heard each other. After a while, we just stopped trying." Daniel nodded slowly, his own scars flinching beneath the surface. "Sometimes, two people can share a space and still feel completely alone." She swallowed the admission, settling like weight on the desk between them. "That's why I frame things like Elena's picture," she said. "It reminds me that words don't have to be sophisticated to be powerful. Just honest." They sat in silence then, not awkward but expansive. A silence that allowed breath, connection, trust. When Daniel rose to leave, she walked him to the door. Just before he stepped out, she touched his sleeve. "Daniel?" He turned. "If this grows the way I believe it can, you're not going to be just a trainer. You'll be part of something bigger than this company. I want you to prepare for that." He hesitated. "You think I'm ready?" She gave him a smile that felt like spring warming the edges of a long winter. "I think you've always been ready. You were just waiting for someone to hand you the microphone." That night, as Daniel tucked Elena into bed, she blinked up at him sleepily. "Were you a teacher again today?" He brushed her hair back. "Yeah, kind of. Did you teach them about words?" He smiled, and silence. She wrinkled her nose. "That's not a word." "No," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "But sometimes it says the most." The air was bright with the clarity of late winter, one of those rare city mornings when the sky stretched cloudless above the rooftops, and the streets felt just a little less hurried. Daniel walked Elena to school, her hand wrapped around his finger, her steps bouncing in rhythm with her new vocabulary song. He watched her with quiet awe. She'd begun peppering her speech with words in other languages, merci, gracias, even the occasional arigato, all picked up from his training materials. Every time she used one correctly, she'd beam as if she'd solved a great mystery. Daniel didn't know how to explain to her that she was doing something even greater. She was absorbing the belief that the world was bigger than herself and still full of kindness. After he dropped her off, he headed straight to Isabel's office. She'd requested a meeting formal with a calendar invite and a title that simply read, Proposal Review Expansion. His nerves buzzed. He arrived 5 minutes early, knocked once, and stepped inside when she called him. Isabel sat behind her desk, her laptop open but pushed aside. Sunlight spilled across the room, catching on the picture Elena had drawn still framed by her window. She motioned to the seat across from her. "Have a seat, Daniel." He did, straightening his collar without thinking. She folded her hands. "This won't take long. I just want to be clear, and I want you to hear it from me directly." He braced himself. "We're expanding the program," she said. "The pilot exceeded every benchmark: employee engagement, customer satisfaction, even revenue. The board approved funding to roll it out to all our flagship properties by year's end." Daniel blinked. "That's incredible." She nodded, "Which means we need someone to oversee the rollout, the curriculum, the onboarding, the regional trainers. We'll call the position Director of Language and Cultural Integration, and we'd like that person to be you." Daniel stared at her. It was one of those moments where the world stood still, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but with the quiet weight of something impossible being offered like an open palm. "I don't have a degree in corporate leadership," he said after a moment. "I'm not polished." "You're respected," Isabel said. "Trusted, and that can't be taught. I'm a single dad who's been scraping together dignity with dish soap and night shifts. And now, you're a single dad being offered a 6-figure salary, flexible hours, and a chance to reshape how this company sees the world." Silence bloomed between them. He wanted to say yes. But another voice tugged at him, a quieter one, the kind that sounded like doubt but wore the clothes of reason. "What if I'm not the man they expect?" he asked. "What if I fail?" Isabel leaned forward. "Then you'll fail with grace, and you'll try again." "But I don't think you will." Daniel lowered his eyes. "It's a lot." She smiled. "Yes, it is. But Daniel, when we talk about building a company that sees people truly sees them, you're the example. This job isn't a handout. It's a reflection." He left her office with the offer letter in hand, heart thudding like he'd just run a race. Instead of heading to the training room, he ducked outside and walked. Just walked. Past the coffee shop where he used to sit with coupons and ration out change. Past the bookstore where he once traded a first-edition novel to buy Elena's snow boots. Past the subway entrance he'd stood beside for an hour during the worst week of his life, unsure how to tell his daughter they couldn't afford both rent and dinner. He stopped in front of the playground near their old neighborhood. Children played. A father pushed his toddler on the swing. The laughter rang out like bells. Daniel sat on the nearest bench, the letter resting on his lap, unopened now, but still vibrating with possibility. He thought of the man he was 2 years ago, tired, grieving, embarrassed by kindness, unsure if dignity could survive humility. And then he thought of Elena's tiny voice that morning. "We say, 'Thank you in all the ways we can, Daddy,' because not everyone speaks the same, but everyone likes to feel happy." She was right. She always had been. That evening, Daniel picked Elena up early and took her to their favorite noodle shop, the one with origami cranes hanging in the window and chopsticks that made her feel like an explorer. Halfway through their meal, she leaned across the table, sauce on her chin. "Why are you smiling so much?" "Because I was offered a big job today," he said. "A really big one." Her eyes went wide. "Like, boss?" "Big kind of," he said, "but not the kind of boss who yells. More like the kind that teaches people how to see others better." "That's what you already do," she said with a shrug, slurping a noodle. "But now you get paid more." He laughed. "Exactly. Then say yes." "It's not that simple, honey." Why, Daniel paused. "Because sometimes grown-ups get scared when good things happen. We're not used to them. We think maybe we don't deserve it." Elena reached across the table and took his hand, sticky fingers and all. Good things don't care if you're scared. They come anyway. Just say thank you. He squeezed her hand. Maybe that's what courage looked like, not being fearless, but letting love be louder than fear. Later that night, he emailed Isabel. Subject, offer, response body. I still have no idea how I ended up here, but I think maybe the answer isn't why me, it's why not now. Let's build something that lasts. Daniel, he hit send before he could talk himself out of it, and as he closed the laptop, he whispered to the quiet room, "Thank you." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the apartment blinds like a quiet declaration, gentle golden and full of something Daniel hadn't felt in years: steadiness. Elena was still asleep, tangled in her blanket, the tip of her nose just barely peeking out. Daniel stood at the counter, coffee cooling beside him, the offer letter spread open once again on the table. He'd read it a dozen times. The terms were generous, more than he'd ever earned even in his best days as a teacher. But what struck him most wasn't the salary or the title. It was the signature at the bottom, Isabel Raines, CEO, Cadenza Hospitality Group, and the handwritten note just beneath it. This door is already open. All you need to do is walk through it. He had spent so long fighting to be heard, to be seen, to survive, that he didn't know how to receive. Kindness was something he gave, not something that came back. That kind of shift, the one from survival to acceptance, was harder than it looked. Later that afternoon, he headed to the restaurant with Elena bundled beside him. She insisted on carrying her own backpack even though it was nearly half her size, and chattered about a school project where she'd drawn flags from different countries. "We're learning how to say thank you in 10 languages, she said, beaming. "I already knew 4 because of you." Daniel grinned. "I'm impressed." She leaned in, lowering her voice like it was a secret. "Some kids said it was weird, but then I told them it makes people feel happy in their hearts." That made them quiet. He squeezed her hand. "That's because you're teaching them something most adults don't even know." Isabel was waiting for them in the conference room. Elena gave a cheerful wave and immediately skipped to her reading nook, now stocked with more books, a beanbag chair shaped like a panda, and a small table with colored pencils in glass jars. Daniel gave Isabel a curious glance. She shrugged. "I asked HR to approve it. I figured if she's going to be our unofficial ambassador of joy, she deserves her own office." Daniel chuckled, but emotion tugged quietly at the corners of his chest. They sat across from each other. Isabel's demeanor was as always composed, but today there was a softness around her edges. "I got your email," she said. "Thank you for saying yes." He nodded. "Took me longer than I thought it would." She tilted her head slightly. "Because of fear. Because of worth," he said simply. "I've lived a long time thinking what I do only mattered if it kept us afloat, not if it fulfilled me. It's strange to be invited to do something because of who I am, not just what I can fix." Isabel nodded slowly. "I know the feeling." Daniel studied her. "Do you?" She hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "When I was promoted to regional VP, I was the youngest in the room. The only woman, the only immigrant. I had to earn respect in boardrooms where every sentence I spoke was weighed for flaws. So I learned to speak less, work harder, prove I belonged." He saw it then, not the powerful CEO who moved rooms with confidence, but the young woman who once stood at the edge of opportunity, wondering if anyone truly wanted her to walk forward. "What changed?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I did. I stopped apologizing for where I came from, and I built something where other people wouldn't have to." Daniel nodded. "That's what this program feels like. A place where no one has to apologize for their accent or their past." Her gaze met his, and for a long moment there was nothing between them but shared understanding. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't power dynamics. It was two people who had spent most of their lives translating their value, finally speaking the same language. That evening, after the staff had gone and the building quieted, Daniel stayed behind to clean up. Isabel joined him, rolling her sleeves to help him gather papers and markers from the training room. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know," she replied, smiling, "but sometimes it feels good to be useful." He looked at her a little surprised. "You don't already feel that way." She shrugged. "Sometimes. But not always. Not in ways that matter to people. Success can be loud, Daniel, but meaning, that's quieter, harder to track." They moved in silence for a moment. Then Daniel said, "You've made something meaningful here. So have you." They stood facing each other, arms full of folders and notes, exhaustion in their bones, but something deeper in their eyes. Something that hadn't been there before. A stillness, a seeing. And then Elena appeared at the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her panda backpack slung over one shoulder. "Are we going home, Daddy?" Daniel smiled. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just wrapping up." Isabel knelt down. "Do you know what your dad did today?" Elena shook her head. "He helped make this place feel like it belongs to everyone. That's very special." Elena tilted her head, thinking, "Daddy does that everywhere. It's just how he is." Daniel looked down, throat-tight, heart thudding in quiet gratitude. That night, back home, he tucked Elena in and sat beside her while she drifted off. The room was dim, the hum of the radiator gentle. On the nightstand sat a note she had written earlier that week in careful loopy handwriting. "Dear Daddy, I love how you help people feel safe. I want to do that too." He folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside Isabel's note. One from his daughter. One from the woman who saw something in him before he dared to. Both reminders that maybe it was time to believe in the possibility of more. Not because he had fought for it, but because sometimes hope shows up even when you stop asking, and the only thing left to do is let it in. The first time, Daniel stood in front of a packed ballroom to teach, he didn't wear a suit. He wore a dark gray sweater, soft at the elbows, and a lanyard that still felt unfamiliar around his neck. But when he looked up and saw the faces, chefs in starched whites, hosts in sleek black uniforms, cleaning staff valets, and concierge trainees, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt home. The flagship hotel in Boston had invited him to launch the first regional rollout of the Cultural Integration Program, a bold step that Isabel had fought for tooth and nail. And now, here he was, once a dishwasher, now a director with a stack of name cards in 6 languages and a slide deck that began with a question. What does it mean to be welcomed? He watched the room go still. Not confused, reflective. A young man raised his hand, to feel seen. A woman from the Philippines added, to feel safe. Another whispered, to feel like you belong even if you've never been here before. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Now tell me how many guests walk through your hotel's front door each day who are carrying more than a suitcase. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's loneliness. Maybe it's just the exhaustion of not being understood. Silence followed. He stepped forward and continued. Today, we're not just learning phrases. We're learning how to listen with our eyes, our posture, our tone. Because it's not about perfect pronunciation. It's about effort, the kind that tells someone, I see you. I want to meet you where you are. Over the next 2 hours, Daniel guided them through greetings in Korean, Hindi, Portuguese. He shared stories, not just language tips, but moments where a single word had changed the energy in a room. He told them about the French tourist who cried when he offered her tea in her own language, about the Turkish grandmother who hugged him simply because he'd asked, How was your flight, in a language no one else had tried? Each story landed like a thread, weaving the room together. And by the end, when he asked for a final reflection, a bellhop with hesitant English stood and said, This makes me proud to work here, not just to serve, but to connect. Daniel swallowed hard, nodded. That's the goal. Afterward, as the attendees filtered out, Isabel met him near the side doors, a cup of coffee in hand, and something warm behind her, usually composed expression. You didn't just teach them, she said. You gave them pride. Daniel shrugged modestly, though his heart was full. They already had it. I just reminded them. She smiled, real and slightly tired. That's what leadership is, Daniel. You remind people who they've always been before the world convinced them otherwise. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "Thank you for seeing this, for seeing me." "You're welcome," she said, then added with a softness he hadn't expected, "And I'm still seeing." Back in New York that weekend, Daniel and Elena spent a lazy Saturday morning making pancakes, hers shaped like stars, his like question marks that didn't quite land. She danced around the tiny kitchen humming a tune she made up on the spot called "Thank You" in every language. As she swirled around him, he couldn't help but laugh. "You're a one-girl musical. I'm practicing for the school show," she said. "We're singing songs from different countries. I told Mrs. Halpern I already know how to say hello in 5 languages, and she said maybe I should teach." Daniel smiled. "Of course she did. You're becoming a pro." Elena plopped into a chair and beamed. "Is it weird that I like learning how people say things like, 'I want to talk to everyone'? Even people who look mad. Because maybe they're not mad. Maybe they're just misunderstood." Daniel paused, flipping a pancake as the edges browned. He turned toward her and said, "You know, most people go their whole lives without realizing that." She shrugged. "I just listen like you do." Later that evening, after Elena had gone to sleep with her arms wrapped around a globe-shaped pillow, Daniel sat at the small kitchen table reviewing reports from the Boston launch. The results were even better than projected. Engagement scores up. Staff retention improved. Even guest satisfaction had spiked, especially from non-English speakers. But what moved him most were the handwritten notes. "I've worked here 10 years, and today felt like the first time someone invested in me. I'm proud of my language again. I used to hide my accent. Not anymore. He made me feel human. That's more than I expected from a training." He leaned back, overwhelmed. Not with pride, exactly, but with something deeper. Validation. This was what he'd tried to give his students years ago in that forgotten classroom before politics and fear stripped it away. Now he was giving it again. Freely. Widely. Without apology. At midnight, his phone buzzed with a message from Isabel. Isabel Rains. "I watched the recording of today's session. You made me cry in the best way. You've built something real, Daniel. Something bigger than both of us." He stared at the screen, heart full, and typed slowly, "Daniel Reynolds. I think kindness always wanted to be a movement. We just had to stop whispering it." A pause, then another message came through. "Isabel Rains. Then let's keep making it louder." Daniel set the phone down and looked around the quiet room. The same room where not long ago he had sat with empty hands and too many unanswered questions. Now the answers had come, not all at once, but through people, through trust, through words that never needed to be perfect to mean everything. He looked at the blank notepad on the table, pulled it close, and began sketching ideas for the next city. More staff, more stories. More lives that might be changed not with brilliance or bravado, but with something far more lasting. Compassion, and a willingness to speak even when the world forgets how to listen. The autumn air had turned crisp by the time Daniel stood on the rooftop terrace of the Midtown Hotel, a skyline of silver and slate stretching beyond him. He wore a simple navy coat, hands in pockets, watching his breath rise and vanish into the early dusk. Below, the streets of New York moved like veins, pulsing with purpose, never still. He wasn't nervous about the gala, not really, but something inside him trembled. This wasn't just another training session. Tonight was the first major public unveiling of the hospitality group's new Human First initiative, an ambitious expansion of the kindness through connection philosophy he had helped inspire. They were calling it the language of welcome. His name was in the program, and on the seat cards, and, most terrifyingly, on the podium. "You okay?" Daniel turned at the familiar voice. Isabel stood a few feet away, elegant in a deep burgundy dress that moved with the wind. Her hair was swept back simply, but her presence made it impossible to look at anything else. "I don't belong here," he said quietly. She stepped beside him. "That's funny. Because the whole thing only exists because you do." He exhaled, looking back over the city. "I'm still the guy who used to sweep crumbs under tables hoping no one would notice I didn't have a future." Isabel's voice was soft but steady. "And now, you're the man helping thousands find theirs." Daniel turned toward her, eyes gentle. "Why me?" "Isabel." She didn't answer at first. Then, her gaze unwavering, she said, "Because when you stood in that kitchen and spoke to those guests in 6 languages, you reminded me what dignity sounds like." She paused, then added, "I forgot what that felt like for a while." Daniel looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his expression. And then, quietly, she reached into her clutch and handed him an envelope. Cream-colored. Handwritten. "Open it, later," she said. After the speech. The gala was held in the grand ballroom lit by chandeliers that looked like constellations caught in crystal. Guests from across the industry gathered: executives, journalists, community leaders. Elena had begged to come, but was now safely asleep at home with Sophia, their sweet older neighbor who'd long ago become family. Daniel stood backstage as the host introduced him. His legs felt heavy. But when he walked out and faced the room, he didn't see a crowd. He saw moments. The single mother in housekeeping who once cried when someone greeted her in Tagalog. The doorman who learned basic sign language just to say, "Welcome to a deaf couple." The manager who'd started hosting Friday lunches so his multilingual team could teach each other greetings. Daniel took a breath. Kindness, he began, isn't revolutionary because it's new. It's revolutionary because we forgot it works. The room hushed. And somewhere along the way, he continued, we started believing that helping others meant weakness. That if you spoke softly, you wouldn't be heard. But I've learned something different from dish pits, from lobbies, from strangers with tired eyes and heavy stories. He paused, voice clear but emotional. Kindness isn't about saving the world. It's about saving one moment for someone. And when enough of those moments happen, they stitch together into something stronger than policy, stronger than profit. They stitch into hope. When he stepped off the stage, the applause followed him like a heartbeat. Back in the quiet of his apartment, Daniel sat at the kitchen table while the radiator hissed beside him. Elena's crayon drawing of their little family hung crookedly on the fridge. A new one, a hotel with hearts for windows, sat next to it drying. He reached for Isabel's envelope. Inside was a letter. Daniel. There was a time I believed leadership meant never needing help, that offering someone a hand meant lowering your own worth. But then you stood in a back kitchen and chose to connect instead of perform. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were being who you are, and in doing that, you reminded me who I wanted to be. Thank you for teaching me how to lead with humanity again. Isabel. Tucked inside the letter was a small laminated photo, grainy, faded at the corners. A teenage Isabel standing next to a community board that read, "Welcome" in 6 languages. Her expression was uncertain, her smile shy. On the back, a line was scrawled, "Never forget where you came from. It's how you'll know where to lead." Daniel held the photo a long time. Then he picked up his phone and sent one message. "Daniel, you still carry this, Isabel, every day. Tonight I gave it to the only person I trust to carry it next." His hands trembled not from fear this time, but something else. Responsibility. And maybe love. That weekend, Daniel took Elena to the park. She raced around in a red hoodie, her laugh echoing off the swings. At one point, she ran back breathless. "Daddy." "That boy over there looked sad." I said, "Hi," in his language, I think. He smiled. Daniel chuckled. "What language did you try?" She shrugged. "I don't know, but it felt right." He pulled her into a hug. "Sweetheart, sometimes trying is the most right thing of all." As they walked home hand in hand, the city around them roared and shimmered, but inside Daniel's chest was only stillness. a rare and beautiful peace that comes not when you arrive somewhere great, but when you finally understand why you were walking all along, and who you were meant to walk with. The first snow came early that year, drifting past the windows of the small Brooklyn apartment like feathers from a silent sky. Daniel stood in the living room, his arm draped around Elena's shoulders as she pressed her nose against the frosted glass. "Do you think it'll stick?" she asked, her breath fogging the pain. "Maybe," he said gently. "Sometimes the ones that stay surprise you." She looked up at him with a knowing grin. "Like us," he chuckled. "Exactly like us." Across the room, Isabel was bent over a large cardboard box unpacking books with faded spines and old Post-it notes fluttering from the edges. Daniel stepped over, pulled one out gently. "The Little Prince," in French. She nodded. "It was my father's. I thought Elena might like it." Elena, having overheard, skipped over and plopped onto the couch. "Only if someone reads it in French first. Then English." Daniel smirked. "You're becoming quite the linguist, Missy." She shrugged with mock modesty. "I have a good teacher." Their laughter filled the room, not loud, not showy, just warm, familiar, like home. That morning, they'd moved in together, not with a grand announcement, but with mugs packed in blankets and Daniel's favorite skillet nested next to Isabel's lemon zester. The kind of merging that didn't require speeches. Just trust. Just time. The hotel chain had officially launched the language of welcome across 15 cities. Daniel now led the initiative, full-time, traveling occasionally, but always returning to Brooklyn to his daughter, and now to the woman who once watched him from behind a silent boardroom table, never blinking until he made her believe again. The beauty wasn't in the size of the program. It was in the messages that kept pouring in. My dad cried when the bellman greeted him in Spanish. He hadn't been home in years. We don't just serve guests, we honor them. This training reminded me I'm not invisible. Kindness, Daniel had come to realize, wasn't magic. It was muscle. The more you used it, the stronger it became. Not in volume, but in reach. That afternoon, the three of them walked to a nearby cafe. The snow had begun to melt into slush, and Elena danced between puddles in her rubber boot scarf trailing like a kite behind her. Inside, the warmth of the coffee shop wrapped around them like a second coat. The place was lively, students with laptops, an older couple sharing a slice of pie, a young man nervously rehearsing a presentation aloud. As they settled at a table, the waitress came by, a teenager with nervous hands and an accent Daniel couldn't place. She fumbled slightly, struggling to find the English words for cream and sugar. Daniel met her eyes gently. "¿Quieres que te ayudemos?" he offered softly. Her face lit up. "Sí, por favor." He translated for Isabel and Elena, who both smiled in understanding. When the waitress left, Isabel leaned in. "That was her first day. I overheard the manager earlier." Daniel nodded. "Then maybe it's her first good day." Later that evening, Elena curled up between them on the couch, dozing off mid-sentence while trying to read aloud from The Little Prince. Her fingers still held the page as if determined to keep the story going, even in sleep. Daniel carefully pulled the book from her hand, placed it on the coffee table, and kissed her temple. Isabel watched, her voice low. She trusts everything around her. "I never had that as a child." "You do, now," he said. She turned to face him, eyes glistening but unafraid. "So do I." Daniel took her hand. "I used to think I'd already lived the best parts of my life. That what I lost defined me." She squeezed his fingers. "But what you gave, that's what defines you." Outside, the city buzzed with life-honking horns, laughing strangers' trains in the distance. But inside, that small apartment, time seemed to slow to the rhythm of breathing, of belonging. Weeks later, the hospitality group released a short documentary about the initiative. Daniel didn't appear in most of it, not directly, but his voice narrated the beginning and end. The final line stayed with viewers long after the screen went black. Kindness speaks many languages. But the one people remember most, is the one that says, "You matter." The video went viral not just in corporate circles but in quiet corners, community colleges, church halls, even prison education programs. People began sharing their own stories of being seen, and kindness began to echo. On the first night of the new year, the three of them stood on the rooftop of their building watching fireworks bloom across the skyline. Elena clapped with every explosion of light. It's like the city is saying, "Welcome to the new year." Daniel smiled. "I think it is." Isabel reached for his hand. "You know you could have stayed invisible, just gotten through, but you chose to care." Daniel looked at her, then at the girl beside them, face lit by wonder. "I think kindness finds us when we finally stop hiding from who we are," he said. And with that, the wind picked up slightly, swirling around them like a whispered promise. Not every story begins in light, but the best ones like this end there, with warmth, with hope, with a quiet, steady voice that finally learns how to say, "Welcome home." We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or made you see kindness in a new light, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care, stay kind, and keep believing in the quiet miracles all around you.